World War I and World War II were the most devastating wars of the 20th century. With a combination of scope and scale unparalleled in history, it makes sense that these two conflicts have the special title of World War. They aren't, however, the only two wars in history that spanned across the world, and these previous worldwide wars can teach us a lot about imperialism and global history. Let's explore. Before we get into the forgotten world wars, let's discuss the geographic scope of the two actual world wars. World War I was fought from 1914 to 1918 between the Central Powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, and the Allied powers or Entente led by France, Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and the USA. There was fighting in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, and naval battles across the world's oceans. There weren't any land battles in the Americas, but countries like the US and Brazil were directly involved. The Allied powers eventually won, though Russia was plunged into civil war. World War II was even more widespread, with the Axis powers led by Germany, Italy, and Japan fighting the allies of World War II, formerly called the United Nations, led by the UK, the USSR, the USA, and China. More than 50 nations were involved from the late 1930s to the Allied victory in 1945. The war was fought all across Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. There was one land campaign in the Americas, on the Alaskan islands of Attu and Kiska, as well as naval battles and raids in the region. Our forgotten world wars should at least have a similar geographic scope to World War I. So while the Taiping Rebellion saw as many fatalities as World War I, it was only in China, so it won't count. Similarly, the First Gulf War saw belligerents from every inhabited continent fighting against Iraq, but all the actual fighting happened in the Middle East. The war's theaters should also actually affect each other. For instance, in the 620s, the Avars were fighting the Byzantines, who were fighting the Sasanian Persians, who were fighting the Western Gokturks, who were fighting the Eastern Gokturks, who were fighting the Tang Dynasty in China. But this isn't really a world war, since the Avars and the Tang had basically nothing to do with each other. With these conditions, there are at least 7 world-spanning wars from before World War I. Most follow the same pattern as World War I. Some political event sparks war in Europe, the rest of Europe joins in, then they drag in their colonies and overseas allies, of which there were many thanks to colonialism and imperialism. Unlike World Wars I and II, Britain and France were on opposite sides of all these wars after the first. Some modern historians call these Anglo-French conflicts the Second Hundred Years' War, after the Hundred Years' War between England and France in the late medieval era. The 30 Years' War started in 1618, when Protestant nobles rebelled against Catholic Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II, literally throwing Ferdinand's representatives in Prague out a window. War spread across Europe, subsuming the end of the 80 Years' War between the Netherlands and Spain, and the Dutch-Portuguese War over their colonies. We've seen that war several times on this channel already. It's the reason Francesco Carletti's stuff was taken by the Dutch on the last leg of his voyage around the world. It's why the Dutch tried to settle Brazil in 1630, and it allowed Koxinga to take over Dutch territory on Taiwan and establish the Kingdom of Tongning in 1661. Sweden intervened on the Protestant side, as did France despite being Catholic. Portugal rebelled against the Spanish crown in 1640, making that war 3-sided. The war even reached the Kingdom of Kandy, alas spelled with a K, in modern Sri Lanka. The 1648 Peace of Westphalia secured rights for Protestant rulers in the Holy Roman Empire, but Spain and France fought on until 1659, and the Dutch and Portuguese into the 1660s. The Dutch also seized New Sweden in North America in 1655 without declaring war. The 9 Years' War started in 1688. The Grand Alliance of the Dutch Republic and the Habsburgs of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain fought expansionist France under Louis XIV. William and Mary, co-monarchs of England, Scotland, and Ireland, joined the Grand Alliance in 1689, after taking power in the Glorious Revolution. The war reached North America as King William's War, with French and English colonies recruiting native allies like the Wabanaki and Iroquois confederacies, respectively. The French captured York Factory on Hudson Bay from the English, and raided Spain's port Cartagena de Indias in modern Colombia. The Dutch captured a French trading post at Takoradi in modern Ghana, and the French outpost of Pondicherry in India, returning it in the Peace of Rijswijk that ended the war in the Grand Alliance's favor in 1697. The War of Spanish Succession started just 4 years later in 1701, over whether the throne of Spain would pass to the French Bourbons or stay with the Habsburgs. The English and Dutch sided with the Habsburgs, while Portugal switched sides from the Bourbons to the Habsburgs in 1702. North America saw fighting in Queen Anne's War, between England's colonies and both New France to the north and Spanish Florida to the south. Several Caribbean colonies were attacked, as was Portuguese Cape Verde off the African coast. The French attacked Rio de Janeiro in 1711, forcing the city to pay a ransom. In the end, the Bourbons won the Spanish crown, ceding Philip V of Spain, but Habsburg Austria gained Spain's possessions in Belgium and Italy. The newly formed United Kingdom of Great Britain gained the most, Gibraltar and Minorca from Spain, and St. Kitts and parts of modern Canada from the French. Next up is the War of Austrian Succession, nominally fought over whether Maria Theresa could reign over the Habsburg monarchies as the dynasty's only ruling empress. Maria Theresa's main allies were the Netherlands, Russia, and Britain, fighting forces led by France, Prussia, Bavaria, and Spain. Historians mark the war's start in 1740, with Prussia's invasion of Silesia, though it subsumed the 1739 War of Jenkins' Ear between Britain and Spain in the Americas. British and French-American colonies fought King George's War, again drawing in the Wabanaki and Iroquois. India saw the First Carnatic War between British troops at Madras and Cuddalore and French troops at Pondicherry, with a local Carnatic Sultanate intervening on the British side. The 1748 treaty ending the war was kind of a wash. Maria Theresa remained in power, but the Prussians kept Silesia. Britain and France neither gained nor lost any territory. The 7 Years' War, begun in the mid-1750s, was actually described by Winston Churchill as the First World War. Americans might know it as the French and Indian War, which started in 1754 when British Virginia sent troops into the Ohio Valley, then disputed with France, under some 22-year-old officer named George Washington. As usual, other nations joined in, including once again the Wabanaki and Iroquois, alongside other Native American nations. In a dramatic twist, Prussia allied Britain and Austria allied France once the war reached Europe. Sweden invaded Prussian Pomerania in 1757, but made peace in 1762, taking no territory. Russia fought against Prussia until Peter III took the throne and switched sides in 1762, until his wife Catherine the Great took the throne and declared neutrality in 1763. France and Spain invaded Portugal in 1762, sparking the so-called Fantastic War, which spread to Spanish and Portuguese colonies in South America. The Third Carnatic War in India saw France taking Cuddalore but failing at Madras, and the British taking Pondicherry. The British Royal Navy took ports in Senegal and French Caribbean colonies, and the Spanish colonial cities of Havana in Cuba and Manila in the Philippines. The 1763 treaties of Paris and Hubertusburg ended the war, with France ceding its colonies in mainland North America to Britain and Spain. After the 7 Years' War, Britain was running out of money and started taxing its American colonies. One thing led to another, and the American War of Independence started in 1775 between Britain and 13 of its North American colonies, led militarily by that George Washington guy. Declaring independence in July 1776, these American states united as the United States of America. Cue the eagle with the hawk sound. Other countries joined in to take Britain down a peg, famously France, but also the Spanish and Dutch. The Kingdom of Mysore in India came in to aid their French weapons suppliers, starting the Second Anglo-Mysore War. Many Native American nations fought on each side, with the Iroquois Confederacy split between both. While the war was centered in North America, the battle with the most soldiers involved was the Great Siege of Gibraltar, where Spain failed to retake the British fort. Spain did recapture Minorca with French help. The 1783 Peace of Paris acknowledged American independence, giving them land up to the Mississippi, and granted some territories to France and Spain. Now, France was running out of money. One thing led to another, and in 1789, France had its own revolution. Europe's other monarchies freaked out, especially after the 1793 execution of King Louis XVI. So began 26 years of France fighting basically everyone. Historians often separate the 1792 through 1802 French Revolutionary Wars from the 1803 to 1815 Napoleonic Wars, named for Napoleon Bonaparte, French general, then dictator, then emperor. In Europe, the French stomped 5 coalitions in 17 years. There were also campaigns in Egypt and Syria, the Caribbean, South America, South Africa, and the East Indies, plus side wars involving Persia and the United States. Haiti saw a slave uprising lead into an independence war against France. Napoleon's invasion of Spain spurred Spanish colonies in the Americas to declare independence, as we saw in our video about South America's forgotten countries. After his disastrous 1812 invasion of Russia, Napoleon was beaten back by the 6th Coalition and exiled to Elba in April 1814. He escaped, fighting the 7th Coalition during his 100 days before his final defeat in 1815. In the century between Napoleon and the actual World Wars, Europe mostly maintained the balance of power, with no war spreading farther than the 1850s Crimean War, seeing several powers fighting in Russian and Ottoman territory. Since World War II, the world saw conflicts such as those within the Cold War and the War on Terror. Indeed, several wars are going on today, but thankfully there hasn't been another war of the same global scope. Hopefully, learning about these worldwide wars in our past can help us work towards a lasting peace in the future. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments, and subscribe if you want to see more like this. And as always, thanks for watching.